How's it going, you guys? So in this video I want to go into some deeper discussion talking about longevity tonics and what kind of longevity tonics do I believe that are most reliable and that we should really be focusing most of our attention on and things like that. So this is actually a very interesting topic that I kind of came up in my mind when I was discussing gynostemma earlier today. Probably going to be in a separate video than this one on a different day probably, but and that is the fact that like here in like our modern times, like I would say here in the West, in the Western world, but no, it's, you know, everything's Western these days. When people talk about Western like science or Western medicine, they're just talking about reductionisms, I believe. That's like the Western philosophy. It's whatever. But basically reductionism, like mainstream science, whatever. The longevity communities are so fascinated with these things like resveratrol, curcumin, what else? What is it? From broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts! Freaking Rhonda Patrick. Broccoli sprouts! The great thing about broccoli sprouts, the way she says it, what is the compound? It's been a long time since it starts with an S. It'll come to me. Anyway, resveratrol, curcumin, the other one, it's like a form of niacin, I believe, nicotinamide, nucleotide, whatever. And a wide variety of other compounds that are kind of like pharmaceutical grade, and they're isolated from whole herb plants, like obviously everyone already knows, curcumin with piperine, from fucking turmeric and black pepper, which is, you know, a traditional combination in the whole food form, and like resveratrol from red wine, you know, whatever. And there's a lot of other ones out there that I just can't think of right now. But these these longevity scientists are all fascinated with isolating these compounds that they speculate might be contributing to longevity or have these like super hardcore underground longevity boosting benefits. Like, oh, look at this, we like starved mice and they lived, 2 to 3 times as long. And every single, animal that we studied, when we starved the shit out of them, caloric restriction, modified protein fast, whatever, they lived twice as long, blah, blah, blah. Obviously in humans that dramatically lowers quality of life, and there seems to be other ways of boosting lifespan that don't sacrifice quality of life. And on top of that, obviously if we look at centenarians, a lot of them, that live past 100, they didn't seem to at least intentionally starve themselves. And in fact, a lot of them ate pounds of chocolate and eggs and blah, blah, blah. And so I just feel like there's a deeper part to longevity that might be more simple that we can't see because we constantly are addicted to overcomplicating things. And if you've listened to a lot of my videos over the past year, you might notice that there's a reoccurring theme that I'm noticing is like a lot of the reason why we don't see the most beneficial things is because we're so fixated on the reductionist paradigm where we overcomplicate things. And I'm going to have to make separate videos on all of these things, including like strength training, boosting immunity and health, and like what it means to be healthy and what, whatever. Point is, we overcomplicate things and it prevents us from seeing the bigger picture, which might actually be where the answer lies. So in regards to all of this, we have plants that are like gynostemma, ginseng, and there's other things out there like Hoshu Wu, and even things like green tea, okay, that have been used for thousands and thousands of years with, stories and anecdotes, you want to call them that, but even like actual documentation that at the time was the standard of science in medical textbooks from, ancient Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. They had things like ashwagandha, holy basil, and then Tibetan medicine. things like cordyceps, where we have like these documented like qualities of these herbs, and then observations of animals eating them and living a long time, which is interesting because that's kind of how we study these compounds in modern times. We do experiments on animals with rats. Well, if you look at ancient traditional medicine texts, you'll find a lot of societies and cultures who actually were observing their animals eating these plants and getting certain benefits from, living longer and things like that. And so a lot of the, original kind of like speculation on what plants are medicinal and longevity boosters and stuff like that came from observing animals, which is fascinating. But then these cultures, like, ancient China and whatnot, they would use these compounds over and over again in large, the whole society. That was their medicine. And so it was like a large population study, in these ancient cultures, with ancient, medicine, traditional medicine or whatever, along with observing animals, and then using them in clinical practice, over and over again. And that's how they developed their system of medicine and how they developed their observations of these herbs and compounds and food combinations and lifestyle practices and the effects that they have. So, it's interesting because most people who actually take things like gynostemma and ginseng and some of these other ones, remember, everyone's different, because things like ashwagandha and holy basil and rhodiola, like in cordyceps, there are people that might have bad negative experiences with things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, and some of these other ones. And there are a lot of people who claim these things change their life, right? And provided it depends on the extract, a lot of people just simply don't know how to properly take these things because it's no longer like a doctor prescribed thing like it was in these ancient societies. These traditional societies, they would use, ashwagandha in a very specific way that was combined with other herbs, and it was basically prescribed and prepared by a doctor of the traditional medicine. Whereas these days, people they'll go to the supplement store, they'll buy a capsule, and it's like isolated and standardized and all this stuff, which again isn't a bad thing, don't get me wrong. But because of this, they may not be using it in the way that they need to get the right effect. Because with herbs, if you take the whole powdered ashwagandha and you take just 1/4 of a teaspoon and mix it with cardamom and ginger and whatever else, it's going to have a profoundly different effect than if you take 1 gram of a KSM 66 ashwagandha extract, and so you get a profoundly different effect. But what I'm getting at here is, not only is the way we take these herbs different now, but our whole entire view on how, like, medicinal compounds and tonic compounds and longevity compounds is different in the modern mindset, which would be like, what these doctors and things, these scientists, a lot of them are like, oh, we gotta like freaking, find the exact one singular compound that might be responsible for 80% of the results of like a whole herb that's also used in like a whole diet with a whole lifestyle from a whole culture that has amazing longevity and health, right? That resveratrol, that one tiny compound in that red wine, that's the factor involved in the French paradox and all this other stuff, that obviously encompasses thousands, probably millions of other confounding variables that all might be contributing to that society's health and longevity. But it's the resveratrol, that one compound in that one food, that red wine, that these people are using, and it's insane. Anyway, so we have things like gynostemma that have been used for thousands of years, and ginseng. It's been used in traditional medicine. It's been documented in multiple societies, and now in our modern times we have people taking these herbs, and if they take it right and everything else, generally experience great benefits. And now we also have all the same science that is being used on resveratrol and these other compounds that have side effects, by the way, severe side effects, and many times might actually not be contributing towards anything good. I'll get into that in a second. But we have the same type of mechanistic studies in rat trials and rat studies and things like that, and human trials too, that are being used on these isolated compounds. And we're using these same kind of research methods on traditional medicine. Now keep in mind the amount of money that people generally will, that corporations and things will invest in these reductionist compounds is very different from the amount of money that's invested into traditional herbs like anosema and whatnot. Because, you know, there's more of a likelihood of profiting off of something like resveratrol versus profiting off of something like a standardized red wine or something like that. Or more like, you know, how are they going to profit off of traditionally brewed gynosema versus finding that one ginsenoside inside of it and then maybe making a patented extract or something, right? Like KSM 66 is a patented ashwagandha extract, and it's one of the ones that is most clinically studied. You know, versus like the whole herb, you don't really hear as many people raving about that. So, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm not saying like, oh, you know, you should fucking take the whole herb always because it's natural, and natural is the best. You know, and standardized extracts are unnatural, and the human body is not meant to process it, and blah, blah, blah. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like meaningless, and that's a zombie consciousness way of viewing this. Put it that way. I'm going to make a whole other video talking about what zombie consciousness is. But it's ignorant, or more so, it's a newbie way of looking at it. It's, you know, this doesn't make any sense to say that kind of nonsense. The fact is, in certain contexts with certain people, under certain circumstances, certain standardized extracts seem to be highly beneficial, and most of the research on a lot of these herbs are done on standardized extracts. So, anyway, you know, and again, isolated compounds are going to have benefits too, and in some cases might be better for certain purposes than the whole herb. For example, drinking coffee doesn't put me in a state of mind that makes you want to lift weights and do physical activity. Drinking tea definitely doesn't. Even if it's like, I hear people say, oh, I drink yerba mate before my workout. It's like, bro, your workout is nothing compared to my workout. If I drink anosema tea before I go and max out on squats, I'm going to fall asleep and just feel lethargic. But if I take, you know, 400 milligrams of caffeine pills before my workout, I feel so motivated and on top of the world and amazing. But tea and other sources of caffeine, even if you use the same amount of caffeine in those tea whole herb forms, it doesn't give me the same benefit. So that's important to kind of throw out there. But anyway, so the research on things like resveratrol, for example, it's crazy how there's a lot of these authorities out there, and I ain't going to say names, doctors with PhDs and things, who are like, yeah, resveratrol is the way, resveratrol is like this new thing, and it's going to like fucking like take our society to the moon and back. But then over time you find resveratrol doesn't really seem to work very well in human trials. The effects in rats, we don't get the same thing in humans. And now what we're finding is it seems to be highly estrogenic, and it might actually increase your risk of cancer substantially if you take it in the amounts that is recommended by these trials. And then you have people saying, oh, well, the reason why it's giving negative effects or it's not having any effect at all is because you need to take it dispersed in olive oil. You know, it's fat soluble, which is interesting. Like, oh, it all makes sense. That's why the high-fat diet combined with the red wine is so beneficial in these populations. It's fast. The resveratrol, the one singular compound isolated out of red wine, is only soluble in fats. It all makes sense now. And it's like, yeah, actually we don't, and the more bioavailable it is, the worse these negative effects seem to be. And it's like, well, maybe we don't actually want, abnormally high bioavailability of a compound that the body naturally doesn't want in high bioavailability. So, and to me now, looking at all of this, let's say curcumin is beneficial, obviously, if you take it in turmeric as like a pain reliever, an anti-inflammatory or something. But part of the benefit of herbs is that you're able to get these kind of like mild or subtle medicinal effects without the side effects. But what happens when we start to increase bioavailability and absorption and stuff in these tonic herbs or medicinal herbs or whatever, and we start to standardize them and stuff, is you start to see the opposite effects. You start to see severe negative effects. For example, polyphenol supplements, which is something I was very fascinated with for a while. And just a side note, it seems to me on an anecdotal level that when I do consume a lot of polyphenols, I do start to notice my just feeling amazing. But I'm going to have to do like a concentrate experiment with that. But the thing is, when you take like polyphenol supplements, blueberry extract, green tea extract, alpha-lipoic acid, which is an antioxidant, that's not a polyphenol, and all these other things, you start to notice in studies, you'll see markers of inflammation go up, you'll see incidences of cancer go up, and a wide variety of other unexpected problematic effects. So, here's kind of like the summary of all of this. Traditional societies have been using longevity boosting herbs for thousands of years. The highest standard of scientific documentation of those traditional societies, medical textbooks and things like that, that was their highest form of science. And you must understand, they may not have had computers and all sorts of shit, but they built Stonehenge, they built the pyramids, whatever. They were very highly advanced societies, just not in the way that we view it in our modern society, where we're all addicted to technology and basically slaves to large corporations. These traditional societies, and they were slaves in their own way, don't get me wrong. Not to say there wasn't brainwashing and crap going on at a large scale, because there definitely was, but point is, traditional Chinese medicine was part of an advanced society, highly advanced in different ways, in some ways more advanced than we are now, I would argue. The documentation was, the highest standard of scientific documentation, all these things, thousands of years of human experience, of clinical experience with these traditional medicine doctors. These tonic herbs are highly verified with lots of human experience. They were observed in animals, and that was usually how it began being used in humans. And now, in modern times, we use reductionist science to show evidence for a lot of these compounds, these herbs and things. And a lot of these traditional herbs, with all the documentation and things, the evidence we have on some of these things, like for example, ginseng is probably one of the best ones, and ashwagandha as well. The totality of evidence we have and the strength of that evidence is a lot higher in many cases for some of these traditional use herbs. It's a lot higher, better evidence and stronger evidence than what we have for a lot of these, especially these like these reductionist compounds like curcumin, resveratrol, etc., etc. The evidence is not very compelling for these other ones, but all these scientists are fascinated by it, even though it seems like they don't have good benefits. And then even like medicinal herbs compared to modern medicine. A lot of these pharmaceuticals, the evidence is strong in some of their benefits. For example, pain relievers, but the side effects are huge as well. And a lot of people develop other diseases as a direct result of taking some of these pain relievers and other drugs. Whereas we have these traditional alternatives that also seem to be just as effective, or maybe a little bit less effective, but still effective enough, but without all the side effects. So it's like, and again, it's not a matter of, oh, it's natural or not. It's a matter of the evidence involved, the benefit versus the risk of the side effects. So I'm by no means saying one is better than the other, but what I am saying is a lot of people are focused on the wrong shit. They're following gurus that are in this highly reductionist paradigm, overcomplicating a lot of these things, and as a result, they're, and how expensive are these compounds? Are you really going to freaking spend $40 a month on this high-grade resveratrol compound when it doesn't really give you a direct, immediate benefit? A lot of these, like, other herbs and stuff and things that I'm talking about, you can feel immediately. Like, you take some Gynosema tea, you feel calm, you feel grounded, it has an anti-anxiety effect, you feel more energy and more vigor that just builds throughout the weeks, gives you more focus, all of these things. But you take, like, resveratrol and you might not feel anything, or you might feel negative effects or something. So, yeah, it seems more to me that we should probably be looking at things like reishi, cordyceps, Gynosema, ginseng, ashwagandha, holy basil, goji berry tea, and all these things. And maybe still look into the other things, but yeah. So anyway, let me know in the comments what you all think, and I'll talk to y'all next time.